Hello, my name is Anna Birkemeier, and I am a senior at Bowling Green State University. This upcoming May, I will be receiving a Bachelor of Science in Communication Disorders and a minor in music. And today I'll be presenting my honors project on the acoustic effect of masks on speech and singing. This project was mentored by Dr. Ronald Scherer from the Department of Communication Sciences and Disorders and Dr. Emily Pence Brown from the College of Musical Arts. As we all know, masks are extremely important to society right now due to the COVID-19 pandemic. They're used by the general public, which includes professions such as medical personnel, speech language pathologists, and performers. A lot of people are reporting difficulties in intelligibility while wearing masks, as well as anecdotal complaints such as vocal fatigue, a loss in vocal range, and hoarseness and voice quality. So the research questions of this study were, how do masks filter speech and singing, and what mask will perform the best acoustically, that is, match the non-mask production the best? For the methodology, I was the single participant for this study, and we chose 3 masks to study, which were a surgical mask, the singer's mask, and an N95 mask. On the right, there is a figure showing the front and side view of the 3 masks we chose. On the left, we have a surgical mask. This mask is pretty commonly known by the public. As most of us know, it is a single-use mask. It has a thin material, and as you can see from the side view, there are openings on the side rather than having a tight fit around the face. In the middle, we have a singer's mask, which has been advertised to performers and musicians as being the best mask for singing. And that is due to the space between the wearer's mask, the wearer's lips, and the end of the mask, which you can see that duckbill shape from the side view of the figure. And then finally, the mask on the very right is an N95 mask, which, similar to the surgical mask, is pretty commonly known by the public. It is used a lot by medical personnel, and it is regarded as one of the most effective masks for particle protection of COVID-19. As you can see from the front and side view, it has a very tight seal around the mouth and face, which is why it is effective at protecting against COVID-19. For the procedure, the sounds were recorded using PROT, and then each recording was done midday with my voice warmed up to ensure similar vocal quality. The vowels ah, e, and u were produced without the mask for 3 seconds and then with the mask for 3 seconds. This process was repeated each time, 3 times for each phoneme. And then the vowels were spoken, sung on G4, and sung on C5 with vibrato. And if you are not aware of musical notes, a G4 is ah, and C5 is ah. And I used vibrato like I just showed you all. And then for the consonants S and SH, I produced the consonant for 8 seconds without the mask and 8 seconds with the mask. And this was repeated 2 times for each phoneme. The vowels A, E, and U were analyzed through PROT using the spectral slice feature. As you can see, the figure on the right is what the spectral slice looks like on PROT. A spectral slice will give you a spectrum of a sound at a given point in the signal of your choosing. As I labeled on the spectrum, the x-axis is frequency in hertz, and the y-axis is intensity in decibels. I have labeled on the graph the first 4 harmonics, which are notated as H1 right here, H2 right here, H3, then H4. H1 is an important harmonic as it is also the fundamental frequency of a sound. And then finally, I have also labeled the first, second, and third formants, also known as F1, F2, and F3. As you can see, F1 and F2 are around H2 and H3. Then we have F3 over more to the right. As you can see, the formant areas on the spectrum have a higher intensity because the formant areas are important to a vowel's identification as well as its audibility. So these the formant areas are the most important areas for vowels when you are listening to them. It's essentially what makes an ah different than an e or an oo. So I recorded the first 13 harmonics and then the first 12 harmonics into Excel. I recorded the harmonics frequency and intensity. And then this gave me 3 spectra without the mask and 3 spectra with the mask for each condition. Then these were eventually averaged to display the no mask and mask difference on top of each other. And for the consonants, they were analyzed through RT-sect to get a long-term average spectrum, or LTAS, which is very similar to a regular spectrum, but instead of being a given point in a signal, it is throughout the entire signal. The no mask LTAS was displayed on top of the mask LTAS using the transparency feature on Microsoft Word to have both LTAS graphs on one single graph to show the differences once again. The graphs were outlined in Paint for clarity. And then finally, I measured the decibel difference of the spectra measured at every 1,000 hertz using a ruler, and that data were graphed into Excel. This slide here is the results for the no mask spectra for the spoken ah. So we decided to look at the no mask spectra for all of the vowels because we wanted to look at the reliability of my voice. So this graph here on the left is the no mask spectra spoken for the N95 mask session. And this once again is all for ah. For all 3 graphs on this slide, the x-axis is frequency in hertz and the y-axis is intensity in decibels. The middle graph shows the no mask spectra from the singer's mask session, and the graph on the right shows the no mask spectra for the surgical mask session. As you can see, while there is variability, they still follow a similar pattern of formant frequencies and important frequency areas. So you can tell that while they might be a little bit different and there might be minute differences in tongue placement or shape in the mouth, they are all still ahs. Now, here is an example of the N95 mask spectra. On the graph on the left, we have the N95 mask spectra spoken, and this is once again an ah. The graph in the middle shows the average spectra spoken with and without an N95 mask. So the blue spectrum is without a mask, and then the orange spectrum is with the N95 mask. And as you can see throughout pretty much the entire graph, the orange spectrum is below the blue spectrum, meaning that in general, the mask was attenuating frequencies, which means at a certain frequency, there is less intensity at that frequency opposed to without the mask. Then finally, the graph on the right shows the difference between the averages spoken. And again, this is from the N95 session. Rather than the previous graphs, the frequency is still the x-axis, but there is a y-axis of an intensity difference in decibels. And I'm going to point out a few markers on this graph. The first red dashed line is at 0 decibels. So any point above the this first red dashed line means that the mask was attenuating frequencies. This second red dashed line is marked as significant, and this is at 5 decibels. For this study, we decided that anything at or above 5 decibels was perceptually relevant to our study. So as you can see, there are several areas where the points are above that, meaning that we thought that there was significant attenuation in these areas. Then finally, the red circles show the formant frequencies. So as you can see on this graph, form F2, F3, and F4 are above that 5 decibel threshold, meaning that there is significant attenuation in those areas. Finally, I am going to play for you the spoken recording. So you can not only see the difference on this graph, but also hear it as well. The first utterance will be without the mask, then the second with the mask, and then it will be without and with, and so on and so forth. So as you can see, or as you can hear, I guess, there was a slight difference, but it isn't that noticeable. So now here is an example of a very noticeable difference. This is the spoken E for the N95 mask. So looking at this graph on the right, once again, we have F2 and F3 with very significant attenuation. F2 has an intensity difference of about 9, and F3 has an intensity difference of about 11 decibels. So I am also going to play this for you so you can hear that attenuation, which for this example was very perceivable to the human ear. And once again, the first utterance is without the mask, the second with the mask, and so on and so forth. So as you just heard, the masks muffled the sound, and it almost made the E sound a little bit more like an I when the mask was on, which, as you could hear and now see on the graph, it was attenuating the formant frequencies. So now here are some tables that are showing comparisons across different masks. So this table shows the average attenuation of the spoken ah, e, and oo at F1, F2, and F3. And once again, any difference greater than 5 decibels and near the formants are most likely to be significantly different and perceptually relevant. As you can see, I have highlighted the areas that hit that criteria. So when looking at F1, F2, and F3, only the N95 mask spoken E hits that criteria. But all 9 differences are positive, meaning that in general, the mask was attenuating. But if you look at the average attenuation of spoken ah, e, and oo at just F2 and F3, you see there's a lot more significant attenuation. And the reason why we wanted to compare the average of F1, F2, and F3 to just F2 and F3 is because in previous literature, masks have been cited as low pass filters, meaning that the high frequencies of a sound were attenuated, but the low frequencies pass, or they do not attenuate. There isn't an effect on the low frequencies. And F1, like I showed earlier, F1 is a low frequency, always under 1,000 hertz. So we wanted to see what was happening to the higher formants, such as F2 and F3. And as you can see on the graph, on the table here, there was significant attenuation for ah and e with the N95 mask, as well as with the singer's mask. Then for the surgical mask, there was significant attenuation for oo. So according to the table, the surgical mask had the least amount of attenuation. Then the N95 mask and singer's mask had a significant reduction that should distort the vowel when you hear it. And once again, all values were positive, and 5 out of the 9 values were greater than 5 decibels, suggesting significant attenuation for the vowels. And here is a graph showing the intensity differences at F1, F2, and F3 for the spoken vowels for all of the masks. So the points on the graph all show the frequency and intensity at the formants for ah, e, and oo. As you can see, this graph is also showing the low pass filter characteristics of a mask. And the reason we know this is when you look at the trend line and equation, there is a positive slope, meaning that as you go higher in frequency, you also get a higher intensity difference. Onto the G4 vowels. This table shows the average attenuation of a, I, and u sung on G4 at F1, F2, and F3. As you can see, the only value that hit our criteria was the surgical mask for a. But if you look at just F2 and F3, there is significant attenuation for the N95 mask with a. There was no significant attenuation for the singer's mask. And then for the surgical mask, there was significant attenuation for a and e. So according to the table, the singer's mask attenuated the least, then the N95 mask, and the surgical mask had the most significant attenuation, interestingly, which was very different than our spoken results. And then also, a had more attenuation in the formant regions compared to u. And again, 7 out of the 9 values are positive, showing a pattern of attenuation. And finally, for the vowels, we have the C5 vowels. So for the average attenuation for F1, F2, and F3, there was only significant attenuation for the singer's mask for E and using the surgical mask for E as well. But with just F2 and F3, the N95 mask had the least amount of attenuation with no significant values, then the surgical mask with E as a significant value, and finally the surgical mask once again had the most significant attenuation with A and E being significant values. And for this table, E had the most attenuation in the formant regions compared to A and U. So the fundamental frequency in the first formant typically had little to no attenuation across all spectra for all masks, meaning that masks act as a low pass filter because the harmonics below 1000 Hertz tended to not be attenuated. For the spoken vowels, the N95 mask had the most attenuation and the surgical mask had the least attenuation. For the sung vowels, the surgical mask had the most attenuation on G4 and C5. The singer's mask had the least attenuation, sung on G4, and the N95 mask had the least attenuation, sung on G5. And finally, masks may be vowel-specific relative to attenuation amount in the formant regions, which are the most important regions for vowel identity and audibility, but more research would need to be done to solidify that finding. For the consonant comparisons, this is a slide showing the N95 mask for S. The graphs on the left and in the middle show the 2 LTAS graphs for each trial. The blue LTAS is without the mask, and the red LTAS is with the N95 mask. Then this graph on the right shows the difference between the no mask and N95 masks, LTAS graphs. So the x-axis is frequency in hertz, and the y-axis is the intensity difference in decibels. And the blue line shows trial 1, which is the graph on the left, and the orange graph line shows the trial 2, which is the graph in the middle. So as you can see, I circled a location on the graph in a red circle, and that is showing the salient location for S. And a salient location of a consonant is very similar to a formant of a vowel. It is just where a lot of frequency, it's a frequency area that has the most energy in a consonant. So the salient location for S is around 5,000 to 7,000 Hertz. So the peak attenuation at the salient locations for trial 1 and trial 2 were 12.5 decibels at 6,100 Hertz for trial 1 and 16.0 decibels at 5,800 Hertz for trial 2. And just like the vowels, I am going to play the sound recording. So not only can you hear the sound, but you can also see the intensity differences on the graph. And similar to the vowels, the first utterance will be without the mask, the second will be with the mask, and then it will repeat a second time. So similar to the E that we heard earlier, not only did the mask muffle the S a little bit, but it almost made it sound more like an SH. It sounded lower, even though it wasn't lower without the mask on. We perceived it to sound a little bit lower and closer to an SH rather than an S. Then for SH with the N95 mask, once again, we have trial 1 and trial 2, the LTAS comparisons on the left and in the middle. Then the graph on the right shows the difference. The salient location of SH is from around 3,000 to 5,000 hertz. So the peak attenuation at the salient locations were for trial 1, 7.0 decibels at 2,750 hertz. And then for trial 2, 6.9 decibels at 2,650 hertz. For the singer's mask, the peak attenuation at the salient location was for trial 1, 10.1 decibels at 6,050 hertz. And then for trial 2, 10.2 decibels at 6,500 hertz. And for SH with the singer's mask, the peak attenuation was for trial 1, 5.2 decibels at 3,800 hertz. And then for trial 2, it was 1.9 decibels at 3,850 hertz. Finally, for the surgical mask, I only had one trial for S because our second recording became corrupted and we didn't want to compare something that was not, could not be comparable to the other S's. But the peak attenuation at the salient location for this trial was 8.1 decibels at 6,000 hertz. And the peak attenuation at the salient location for the SH trials were for trial 1, 4.2 decibels at 2,850 hertz, and for trial 2, 5.5 decibels at 2,700 hertz. This table here shows the average attenuation of trial 1 and trial 2 at the salient location of S. As you can see, all three values compared to our criteria of 5 decibels or higher all reach that significance threshold, with the N95 mask having the most significant attenuation of 14.25, then the singer's mask being next with 10.15 decibels, and finally with the surgical mask at 8.1 decibels. But there was high attenuation for all masks. Then this is the results for SH. As you can see, there was only significant attenuation for the N95 mask for SH with a decibel difference of 6.95 decibels. And then this graph shows the intensity difference at the salient locations for SH for all three masks. Similar to the graph I showed you earlier, this graph also shows a positive slope with the line of best fit, meaning that as the frequency increases, the intensity difference should also increase. So for the consonants, the N95 mask had the highest attenuation for both S and SH. Then the surgical mask had the least attenuation for both S and SH. And S had higher attenuation than SH for all masks at its salient locations. This is due to the low pass filter characteristics of the mask. So for that, if we go back to this graph, as you can see, if we follow the trend line, you can see that the estimate attenuation for the salient location of S is higher than the estimate salient location of SH, which was more down here. And finally, this graph shows the intensity differences for the spoken vowels A, E, and U at F1, F2, and F3, then the salient locations of S and SH for all three masks. The reason why we wanted to combine the two graphs are because we wanted to show a wide variety of frequencies rather than just low frequencies or just high frequencies to truly encapture the low pass characteristics of the masks. And as you can see, once again, there is a positive slope, meaning that as the frequency increases, the intensity difference also increases. Past studies have noted that masks act as a low pass filter. The Corey et al. Study in 2020 noted little attenuation under 1,000 hertz. They also reported a peak attenuation of around 4 decibels for the surgical mask and an attenuation of around 6 decibels for the N95 mask, which was all above 4,000 hertz. And then another study, Golden et al. In 2020, noted attenuation of around 2,000 hertz to 7,000 hertz, which ranged from 3 decibels with a surgical mask to 12 decibels using 2 N95 masks. Our current study showed similar results, especially between the comparisons of the masks. The N95 mask for both the vowels and consonants had the most attenuation acoustically compared to the surgical mask, which typically had the best attenuation, except for the sung vowels. Finally, our current study added the elements of formants to determine whether attenuation was perceptually relevant or not. The reason why we wanted to look at this was because when you look at a spectrum, the most important areas of that sound, especially for the vowels, for example, are the formant frequencies, or for the consonants, it's the salient location. While there may be evidence of attenuation at valleys or low intensity areas, that wouldn't be relevant to what we are hearing, what we are anecdotally hearing out in society with the masks on, because we wouldn't be able to perceive those differences, which is why we wanted to hone in on the formant frequencies, because that way we know the attenuation that we are noting in our study is what we were actually hearing with the masks on. For clinical and performance relevance, for speech, the surgical mask may be preferred for acoustic reasons, as it was the best for vowels and the best for consonants. Then while the N95 mask performed the worst acoustically, it may be the best for safety reasons. So for certain professions, especially medical personnel, while it might have been the worst acoustically, it probably will be preferred in areas where there's a high likelihood of catching the virus. Then for singing, the singer's mask may be preferred for acoustic reasons, as it was the best for vowels and the second best for consonants. And finally, masks may affect sung vowels less than speech. We hypothesize that there is less attenuation during singing because the distribution of harmonics among the formants is wider, meaning there is less match of harmonics to formants. And finally, for the strengths and limitations of this study, the strengths were it was a relevant study for current pandemic concerns. We found different results for different masks, which pertain to different professions, such as surgeons, performers, or speech-language pathologists. It focuses on the perceptual relevance in reference to formant frequencies rather than just attenuation. And finally, I got guided training and research that will help, the experiences will help me later on in my graduate studies. And then for the limitations, there was human variability due to small differences in effort level, lung pressure, vocal tract shape, placement of the mask on the face, and the mask edge seal on the face. And there was only a single participant for the study. And here are my references. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening.